Thank you for joining me as I continue my examination of the book Not God's Type by Holly Ordway. In this video, I will be covering chapters 11 through 14 of the book. But before we get to chapter 11, we have another interlude between chapters to discuss. This will be interlude number 3. And this interlude deals with prayer. Ordway writes of a time when she asked Father Doran to pray with her before the upcoming fencing season, not to pray that she would win, but to pray that she would do her best for the glory of God. She basically prayed to dedicate her fencing season to God. And Father Doran reminded her, because she came to Father Doran and she was a little sheepish about it. She said, "Is this really something I should be praying for?" And Father Doran reminded her of Paul's command to the Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. And Father Doran basically says, look, just pray about everything. If you're worried about whether or not you should pray about something, just pray about it. So during that fencing season, and then afterward, Ordway found herself praying during all kinds of activities. When she was writing, when she was tutoring students, when she was grading papers, when she was doing laundry. She learned that prayer was not meant to be a special thing in the life of a Christian, but to be an everyday part of having a relationship with God. Well, sure. I mean, you've got to carry the conversation because he ain't talking. So reading this interlude, I was actually reminded of a Saturday Night Live sketch from 1993 where a woman prayed to Jesus in sort of an exaggerated version of what Ordway is describing. The woman would pray to Jesus for everything that happened or that she wanted to happen, so often that Jesus actually appeared to her. He came to her house to ask her to stop. And the line from that sketch that I always remember is Phil Hartman as Jesus going, I mean, Jesus, don't let the rice get sticky. Do you really need my help for stuff like that? And if you've never seen it, it's the sketch is titled Don't Pray So Much, and it's available. You can watch a clip of it on Hulu, and I think it's also on NBC's website. It might be on YouTube, and it's from a 1993 episode hosted by Sally Field, and she plays the very pious woman who does all the praying, and Phil Hartman, of course, plays Jesus, and it's really funny. But anyway, all kidding aside, what Ordway is describing here is the same sort of thing that one could experience through meditation. In fact, the sort of prayer she's talking about, the sort of everyday constant prayer, is essentially a form of meditation. It's taking a moment before doing an activity, or when you feel yourself growing flustered or frustrated, and just taking a moment to center yourself, to regain your focus, to breathe, to center your attention on what you're doing. It's a form of focus and meditation. And you can do it through prayer, I suppose, if those are what your beliefs are, but you don't have to. And the way she describes praying for her fencing season to be about doing her best for the glory of God rather than winning, if you take out the reference to God and you just make it, say, a personal commitment to do your best rather than to preoccupy yourself with winning above all else, and that's something that everybody can benefit from as well. It doesn't matter whether you have any particular religious faith or no religious faith at all. If you remove winning as your primary motivation and you can focus more on doing your work or playing your sport or whatever it is you're talking about, then you can find these same rewards without having to pray and to believe that a God exists. So what I'm saying is, while Ordway sees these things as aspects of her relationship with God, a non-believer can do all the same things and get the same rewards because God isn't actually doing anything, or at least there is no evidence to suggest that God is doing anything. You're the one meditating or praying. You're the one focusing. You're the one setting your priorities. You're the one doing the work. You're the one maintaining your perspective and your focus. If you think you're being helped by God, okay. I see no reason to believe that that's actually happening, but if that's your thing, go live. I only object to the suggestion that belief in God is necessary to do the sorts of things that Ordway describes when she writes about how much better off she is after she started praying more often. I would call that yet another example of Christianity claiming as its sole domain things that actually belong to all of us. Well, that's that interlude. Let's move on now to chapter 11, which is titled Searching for the Source. We rejoin Ordway in the beginning of this chapter, picking up from chapter 10, relating her struggles with the first cause argument. And she says, quote, I turned the idea of the first cause this way and that way, turned it upside down, shook it, and it still held together. I tried to find a fatal flaw in the arguments, but at last I had to confess that I was convinced. At that point, to hold on to an atheistic or even an agnostic position would have been in defiance of logic and reason. As I mentioned last week, the first cause argument is not nearly as impenetrable as Ordway seems to think it is. And even if you conclude that the universe must have had an uncaused first cause, it's a leap from there to that first cause being a personal God, and yet another leap from there to that God being the God of the Bible. What I find telling is that Ordway repeatedly refers to her own inability to find a flaw in the first cause argument. And even if that's true, surely someone as scholarly and inquisitive as she would have looked up responses to the argument. It's one of the oldest and most debated arguments for the existence of God, and it's not as if objections would have been difficult to find, even in the pre-Google Dark Ages. And even if she didn't look into responses to the first cause argument at that time, surely, she has familiarized herself with them since. She chairs an apologetics program at a university, after all. And yet no mention on these pages, at least to this point, that such arguments even exist, let alone what they might be and how Ordway responded to them. And I know that this is primarily a memoir and not a work of hard theology, but even so, I find it very misleading of Ordway to leave her readers with the impression that the first cause argument is irrefutable. After all, she tried and tried, but she just couldn't find a fatal flaw. She said at the end of that quote that I just read that to not believe in God after hearing the first cause argument would be in defiance of logic and reason. But there are numerous responses, numerous refutations to that argument that are completely logical and reasonable. And again, this is her story, this is her memoir. If that's the place where she ended up, that's fine. But she's writing to a Christian audience, and I find it very, very misleading that she pretends that arguments against the first cause just don't even exist. And she acts like, well, I tried to figure out a way out of it, and I just couldn't. That argument is just impenetrable. It's just not true. It's just not true. Well, having been convinced of the existence of a divine creator by the first cause argument, Ordway then began to wrestle with the implications of that. She already believed in the existence of objective moral values, though she says she tried to weasel out of this by arguing against her own beliefs, apparently, that morality was actually just a social construct that endured because it benefited society. But Josh, remember Josh? Josh wouldn't let her off the hook that easily. Quote, I remember the moment that I finally got it. Josh and I were standing outside the gym after fencing practice talking about what the first cause was like and where morality came from. Josh said to me, I bet that you are more certain of the fact that it is wrong to kill an innocent person than you are of the fact that there's a trash can right behind you. I stood there and wrestled with the idea, resisting the urge to turn around and look behind me. I considered how certain I was that there was a trash can directly behind me. There were a lot of trash cans spaced evenly along the sidewalk in front of the gym. Most likely there was one behind me. I couldn't remember if I'd seen it or not. Trash cans are the kind of things that we look at without paying them any attention. Probably it was there, but would I stake my life on whether there was, in fact, a trash can behind me? Definitely not. On the other hand, I would stake my life on the truth that it is wrong to kill an innocent person. The answer was clear, absolutely yes. I was more sure of this moral knowledge than I was of nearly anything else. Well, Josh is a regular Ray Comfort, ain't he? So here's why Josh's argument is silly bullshit, even if you believe that there are such things as moral facts, which exist independent of the moral creatures that think about them. I know of no method by which to empirically demonstrate that those facts exist, or what they are. The existence of a trash can, in other words, is fairly easy to demonstrate. Is there a trash can behind me? I can look. I can see the trash can. I can reach out and touch it. I can ask my friend if they see the trash can. If they reach out and touch it and feel that it's there, then I can have independent confirmation. I can gather information through my senses, and then I can get third-party confirmation of the information that my senses have fed me to have an additional level of confidence that I have gotten the correct information from my eyes, from my fingertips, from my ears, whatever I'm using to gather the information. Yes, there is a trash can there. I can say that. Now then, demonstrate that killing an innocent person is wrong. Show me how you prove that killing an innocent person is wrong is an objective fact. Let's say I believe that killing innocent people is not wrong, purely for the sake of argument, by the way. Show me empirical evidence that will settle our dispute. You say killing innocent people is wrong. I say killing innocent people is not wrong. We have a disagreement. Show me evidence, empirical evidence that will settle our dispute and show one way or the other which one of us is right and which one of us is wrong. Point me to an objective, independent source that will establish indisputably, regardless of personal opinion, that killing innocent people is wrong, or that it's not wrong. Because here's the thing, you can't prove either. Just as you can't prove to me empirically, objectively, that killing innocent people is wrong, I can't prove to you empirically or objectively that it's not wrong. In fact, the entire question doesn't make sense. The existence of objective morality is, at this point, and probably will always be, an unfalsifiable proposition. It may exist. There may be moral facts. We may live in an objectively moral universe, but while the laws of physics are observable and quantifiable, the laws of morality, if they exist, are not. Whether or not objective morality exists, we only ever experience it subjectively. To compare the fact of the existence of a trash can to the supposed fact that killing innocent people is wrong is either extremely dishonest or indicative of a fundamental misunderstanding of how morality works, whether it's objective or not. But I think what Josh does in that scene is even worse than this, because as you heard in that quote that I read, Ordway grappled with the question by relying on her memory. She didn't turn around and verify that there was a trash can there, which she could have done and couldn't have done regarding the moral fact. She tried to remember if there was a trash can behind her. And Josh's point was apparently that she couldn't be 100% sure there was a trash can behind her, but she could be 100% sure that killing innocents was wrong. Well, of course she could, because one question was based on something empirical, is there a trash can there? While the other was based on something subjective, is killing innocents wrong? Again, these are very different kinds of questions. You can never be 100% sure of an empirical fact, especially when you have only your memory to rely on, because there's always a possibility that you're mistaken. But when you're talking about something that you only know because you feel it or think it, you can be 100% certain because that objective fact is right here. And what could possibly contradict it? Again, if I say killing innocent people is wrong, go ahead, contradict me. Objectively, prove that I'm wrong. Show me something that invalidates that statement. Even if we were having an argument about something other than morality, this sort of reasoning completely falls apart. Let's say that I was arguing something else subjective, but as though it were objective. Like, let's say I said that there were objectively good and bad movies. It's not just a matter of opinion or personal taste. There are objective facts. And to support that claim, I say to you, I bet that you are more certain that The Godfather is a good film than you are of what you ate for breakfast yesterday morning. And let's just assume that we agree that The Godfather is a good movie. Have I proved to you that the quality of The Godfather is an objective fact rather than an opinion that we just happen to share, or am I completely misrepresenting the situation? See, I think it's the second one. If you think that The Godfather is a good movie, but you're not really sure if you can remember what you had for breakfast yesterday morning, and I say, aha, see, you're not sure what you had for breakfast yesterday morning, but you're 100% sure that The Godfather is a good movie, what exactly have I proven? Other than I totally misunderstand the nature of the two facts that I am citing. Moving on now to Chapter 12, Experiment House. Ordway opens this chapter with this, quote, "If it was true that I could pursue this journey as a rational endeavor, then why not do so with as much intellectual rigor as I could muster? Indeed, why not start with researching the arguments against the first cause argument that you found so invincible?" But anyway, moving on from that. Ordway had moved on from referring to the first cause as such and had begun calling it God. She now believed in the existence of a personal God who had intentionally created the universe and who paid attention to the things that happened in it, including to her. In the book she was reading at the time, Does God Exist?, both Peter Kreeft, who wrote the introduction, and J.P. Moreland, who argued for God in the debate of which the book is largely a transcript, proposed experiments that could determine the truth of Christianity. Kreeft's proposed experiment was prayer, that is, simply asking God to show you that he exists. And to her credit, Ordway rejected this, though she now seems embarrassed at having done so. Personally, I find this to be one of the most condescending suggestions that evangelizing Christians make. Just pray to a God you don't think exists and ask him to show you that he's there. Not only does it shift the burden of proof from the person making the claim, it also assumes that the atheist being addressed hasn't already done this. Many atheists come from religious upbringings and have prayed to God many times for many different reasons. Many were previously convinced that God existed, but were eventually persuaded otherwise. To assume that all a non-believer needs to do to be converted is to ask God if he's there is childish and insulting. Anyway, Moreland had suggested that it was also possible to determine rationally whether or not Christianity was true by testing it in one's own life. Well, at least now, if she's quoting Moreland, she's made it out of the introduction of the book. I'm glad that she actually made it out of the introduction eventually. Intrigued by the possibility of examining the matter analytically, Ordway set about preparing an experiment to test the hypothesis that Christianity was true. Though she admitted going in that it wouldn't exactly be a scientific experiment, because the data wouldn't be objective empirical information, but rather her own feelings. So let me stop right there. If God exists, if the statement, God exists, is an empirically true statement, which Christians, among others, would say it is, then why can't an experiment be designed to test that statement? Why couldn't there be empirical data resulting from an experiment? Why must Ordway rely exclusively on the data provided by her own subjective experience? The very fact that she was unable to conduct a proper experiment to test what is on its face an empirical claim should have told her something. To test the hypothesis that Christianity was true, Ordway needed some predictions, some things that she would expect to happen if it were the case that Christianity were true. Josh's suggestions were to experience an awareness of the other, or an I get it moment, basically have an epiphany that Christianity is true. And what about failure conditions? What results would disprove the hypothesis? Again, Josh with the suggestion. Failure would be indicated by getting nothing out of it, by not experiencing any sort of change, or by having increased confusion after the end of the experiment. And one more very important thing to establish: how to differentiate between a genuine positive result and wishful thinking. That's a good one. Josh, quote, "Josh was characteristically forthright. That's the drawback. I decided to try refining the idea. Let's say the predictions are met. How can I know that it's because the theory is true? Maybe it would be just because the theory is a more effective ethical model. Josh argued that an ethical model that seemed more satisfying than what I had been able to come up with on my own would, in fact, count as evidence that it came from a higher reality. It reminded me that we weren't doing this experiment by itself, but in conjunction with logical arguments, such as the argument for God from morality. I was willing to accept that. Oh, Josh. I'm sure Josh is a nice guy. I just want to put that out there again. I've said that in past videos. Sure, he's a good laugh, good guy to hang out with, solid fencing coach. But Ordway keeps presenting him as this razor-sharp intellect, this intimidating super apologist. And I just am not seeing it from what she's telling me in this book. Look at the leap he makes in that quote. She asks how she can know if a possible positive result is because the theory is true, instead of the theory, Christianity, simply being a more effective ethical model, which is a great fucking question. And Josh says, well, if the ethical model seems more satisfying than what you've been able to come up with on your own, then that's evidence that it comes from a higher reality. What? Is Josh saying that if Ordway finds the Christian ethical model superior to another model, that means that the claim that the Christian model is of divine origin must necessarily be true? Or at least that is evidence that it comes from a higher reality? Because I call bullshit on that. If Ordway tries living by the Christian ethical model, which is apparently what the experiment will be, though she never quite established specifically that that's what she was going to be doing, if she does that, and she finds it to be superior to the ethical model she'd been living by before, all that means is that whoever created that ethical model, that Christian ethical model, was able to come up with one that worked better for Ordway than her previous model. It does not imply in any way that the Christian ethical model has an otherworldly origin. It does not even imply that the model was the invention of a single individual. All it says is that whoever or whatever created that ethical model was able to produce a better one, in Ordway's experience, than the model Ordway had been using. Josh mentioned the argument from morality. I would point out that even if you accept that objective morality exists, and even if you further accept that the existence of objective morality implies the existence of God, none of that establishes that God's objective morality is to be found in Christianity, let alone exclusively in Christianity, or more so in Christianity than in other moral systems. And Holly Ordway, living according to her or Josh's interpretation of what Christian morality is, and finding it to be better than the morality she followed before, doesn't establish that either. Not even remotely. It doesn't even face you in that direction. In fact, even if you treated Ordway's subjective experience as though it were empirical data, it wouldn't establish anything about whether or not the Christian ethical model had come from a higher reality. All it would establish is that the Christian ethical model was better than Ordway's other model. And if you could empirically test the Christian ethical model against every other ethical model in existence and establish that the Christian model was objectively superior to every other model, that still would not establish or even imply that the model was the product of a higher reality. Even if this question could be settled objectively, which it can't, you can't jump from this is the best of all ethical systems to this ethical system originated in a higher reality. It just doesn't follow. Josh is full of shit. Oh, speaking of how full of shit Josh is, get a load of this. Quote, I realized I had one more question relating back to my difficulties with the concept of faith. Can I expect a result at all if I undertake this as a test? Or would I need to believe ahead of time for it even to have a chance of working? I felt that a lot was riding on this last point. Josh thought about that for a bit. Another good question. Yes, I think you can genuinely do this as a test. Further, if you do it as a test and you get a result, I would say that the result would be more valid because it is less likely to be influenced by wish fulfillment. So a positive result would be very positive. The question then is how much weight to put on a negative result. Without sounding like I am stacking the deck, I don't think that a negative result is all that determinative. He explained that if I didn't get a result from my experiment, or if I got a negative result, such as confusion, the question would still be open. God might still exist, even if I did not experience him in a particular circumstance. Yeah. Let me try to blatantly stack the deck while sounding like I'm not stacking the deck. Josh says that a negative result wouldn't prove that God doesn't exist, and that's true, because the experiment isn't actually designed for the purpose of falsifying God in the first place. It's designed to determine whether or not Christianity is true. But before that, Josh says if you get a positive result, it's very positive, because you're doing this as a test, which means it's less likely to be influenced by wishful thinking for some reason that I won't bother to explain. Okay, so she's going to conduct a pseudo-experiment. And if the experiment shows evidence that God exists, she should treat it as a very significant result. Hey, evidence that God is real. But if she gets a negative result or no result, she should basically just ignore those results and remember that God could still exist. Well, it's a good thing that Josh didn't stack the deck. Josh actually stacks the deck even further by adding another reason why she might get a negative or non-result in her experiment. This is going beyond deck stacking. This is now well poisoning here. He tells her to remember that God is not a tame lion, which is a reference to the Chronicles of Narnia. In other words, just because you go looking for him, don't expect that you're necessarily going to find him. Even though I'm pretty sure in the Bible, doesn't God say to come look for him and you will find him? Whatever. Someone commenting on my invisible imaginary friend analogy from an earlier video in the series said that that reminded them of Carl Sagan's story about a dragon living in his garage, and now Josh has reminded me of it too. The invisible dragon lives in my garage. You can't see him, so just because you open the garage door and look and you don't see him, that doesn't mean he isn't there. He's not a tame dragon. He won't make himself visible just because you're looking for him. So don't take his lack of presence as proof that he's not there. Remember, the dragon could still be there. I mean, why bother going through the pretense of conducting an experiment at all? Why not just accept that it's an unfalsifiable premise? Anyway, Ordway was having trouble with the concept of an infinitely powerful creator who was also personal and who had even lived in human form for a time, as we are told in the Jesus story. But then she went back and she reread The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and through the character of Aslan, she realized that the incarnation of Christ actually made a lot of sense. Now, we're at the end of this chapter. This is chapter 12. We're 12 chapters in, which by page count is halfway through this book. And still there is almost no mention of the Bible. She's found God through Tolkien and Lewis, but not through his supposed holy word. Again, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's very interesting. It's not at all like the stories told by other apologists about their conversions, although I do think there is some element of wishful thinking involved in this, which I will get to very shortly. Let's talk about chapter 13, Light from the Invisible Lamp. Well, Ordway takes this chapter to relate how she came to realize that she believed in the concept of eternal life. Sometime after the discussion with Josh described in the last chapter, she was riding her bike along the coast in San Diego. During the ride, she became aware of how much she loved being alive. After that, in a moment she describes as being like the ground had fallen away from her, she considered eternal life as a real possibility for the first time. She says, quote, "I thought of Tolkien's Middle-earth, a world so richly satisfying to my imagination. What if I could go there in person? It would be wonderful to walk among the Malorn trees of Lothlorien, or have second breakfast in a hobbit hole. I had never grieved over not being able to visit Middle-earth simply because I'd always known that it was a place I could only visit in my imagination. But what if one day I learned it might be real? What if Rivendell could be found on a map, one that I'd always had on hand but overlooked, perhaps labeled with a different name? So what was I just saying about wish fulfillment? Ordway went to talk this over with Josh, who said that it reminded him of the question, why do we have a God-shaped hole in our beings? Implied premise, we have a God-shaped hole in our beings. Evidence offered for the truth of this premise? Nothing. Josh directed Ordway to C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, which I reviewed once upon a time when I was just a young lad in the second An Atheist Reads series, I believe. And of course, in Mere Christianity, Lewis describes his argument from desire, which stated simply in Lewis's own words is, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. Now, Ordway mentioned the argument from desire in a previous chapter, and I kind of zoomed by it. So let me be a little more specific this time. Here's why the argument from desire is not a good argument. Lewis says that creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. And he cites things like a baby is hungry, and there is food. A duck naturally wants to swim, and there is water. Men feel sexual desire, and there is sex. He says nothing about people other than men feeling sexual desire, but hey, it was the 40s, you know. And there are biological explanations for these things. What Lewis refers to as innate desires can also be thought of as instincts, and instincts, like other attributes of organisms, are shaped by natural selection. There are evolutionary explanations for why we have these instincts or these innate desires. Babies aren't hungry because there is food, nor is there food because babies are hungry. Babies get hungry because hunger compels them to eat, and babies who are compelled to eat are more likely to survive than babies who aren't. Therefore, the trait of getting hungry is incredibly common among babies, because those are the babies that survive more often than the babies who aren't hungry and don't eat. Now, that's a really simplistic example, but you get the idea. And the same thing is true with sexual desire. Animals, such as ourselves, find sex to be pleasurable and want to have it, and that confers an evolutionary advantage. Individuals who are motivated to have more sex are more likely to leave behind more offspring that will pass on their genes and the traits which manifest from those genes to another generation. This is just how evolution works. But while an instinct for sexual desire is innate in most of us, it's not innate in all of us. And that holds true for other instincts as well. Lewis refers to these things as though they're universal, but they're not. They're more like extremely common. Some people, for example, are asexual, which in this context means that they feel little or no sexual desire. Others do feel sexual desire, but the type of sex they desire to have or the partners to whom they feel sexual attraction would not naturally result in offspring. And this, too, is perfectly natural. There's another deeper problem, though, with Lewis's argument, and it has nothing to do with the biological explanations for why we have the instincts or the innate desires on which the argument is based. Because Lewis isn't making a scientific argument, he's not appealing to biology, but he's making a philosophical argument. And it simply does not follow that the presence of a desire, even an innate instinctive one, necessitates the existence of something that can satisfy that desire. Like much of Lewis's apologetics, the argument is facile, it is well stated, it is elegantly phrased, it is initially very appealing to many, but ultimately it is shallow and totally inadequate to its task. Even if the desire for God were an innate, universal human instinct, and I don't think it is, that would not indicate that any such God must therefore actually exist. It just does not follow. Let's do chapter 14, shall we? Chapter 14 is titled Results. Well, after discussing it with Josh, Ordway waited to begin her experiment. And she kept going over the central question, is Christianity true? Wrestling with what that meant to her and trying to determine what kind of result she would consider significant. Then one day, while taking a walk and thinking it over, quote, I realized with a shock that my experiment had started without me, and it had yielded results. Of all the internal experiences I have attempted to describe in this book, this one is probably the most difficult. An atheist might dismiss it as all in my head. Indeed, that is what I would have done in years past if such a thing had been suggested to me as a possibility. What had happened was that I recognized a change in my internal state. It was like being feverish while at the same time being completely well. Everything felt sharp-edged, preternaturally clear, as if the very rocks and trees and sky were poised to reveal some meaning beyond themselves. I felt the presence of something, someone that was within me, yet outside or beyond myself. With a feeling something like dread and certainly like fear, I recognized what it was, an experience of the other. Or she'd been turned into a vampire. I mean, because it sounds very similar. Well, I will not dismiss her experience as all in her head, all vampire jokes aside, because I think that it's reductive to do that. When a religious person relates an experience that they have had that they believe is an experience of God, I think it's reductive to just say it's all in your head. And often when we say that a given thing is all in someone's head, what we're implying, whether we intend to or not, is that the thing isn't real. But Ordway's experience was real. Something happened. Something changed. She noticed a difference in herself and how she felt. And she believes this experience was divine, that she was in the presence of God. I see no reason whatsoever to believe that. But it's disappointing, though not unexpected, that after all her talking of wanting to explore the question rationally and to conduct an experiment to look for evidence of whether or not Christianity is true, it comes down to, oh, the experiment had started without me, which means no experiment at all, even by the exceedingly relaxed standards she had set for herself. Pretensions to science and reason and rigorous analysis, but ultimately none of that matters next to I just felt like I was in the presence of God. Which compels me to wonder, if the latter is all you need, why bother with the former? Why insist, as Ordway repeatedly has, and we're only halfway through the book, that Christianity is a faith based on reason and evidence when neither played any role in her conversion? Why not just say God moves on your heart and you come to believe? Why pretend your faith is rooted in logic and facts when, in your very own telling of the thing, it's precisely the opposite? There's a point from earlier that I want to return to as I close out this video. When discussing her so-called experiment with Josh, Ordway asked how she would be able to tell the difference between a genuine result that pointed to the existence of God and an experience that might feel like it was due to God but could have been a result of wishful thinking. And Josh waved it off, saying, well, you're looking at this as a test, so you'll be less likely to be influenced by wishful thinking. Don't worry about it. Which is horseshit. Remember that she had already been convinced that God existed by the first cause argument. And before she received her result, she realized that she loved life and that she found the existence of eternal life to be a legitimate possibility. Does that not indicate at least the possibility of some bias for one result over another creeping in? She had no way to distinguish between a genuine experience of God and an experience that felt like it was of God, but was actually something else. So when she had her experience, which she describes as being in the presence of the other, she just assumed that it must have been God. I submit that the lack of such a mechanism for distinguishing between genuine experiences of God and merely apparent experiences of God renders Ordway's experiment, such as it was, completely useless. It also renders the individual experiences of people who believe they have felt the presence of God useless for the purpose of determining whether or not God actually exists. Now, I don't wish to disrespect the experience that Ordway describes in the book, or any experiences she's had since where she believes that she was in the presence of God. But her subjective experience of God is not evidence for the objective fact of God's existence, unless we can somehow show that her experience must have been the result of interacting with God rather than the result of some other influence. Centuries ago, people could claim that they heard the voice of God and they would be called prophets, if they were lucky. Today, we have a much better understanding of things like hallucination, delusion, and other phenomena that can leave us feeling like an experience which originated internally actually originated externally. And it's a lot more difficult to get people to believe you when you say that you have personally been delivered a message from the mouth of God. Difficult, but not impossible, and long-standing custom and the discouraging of critical thinking has allowed the messages supposedly delivered to those prophets of centuries past to retain an air of authenticity they almost certainly don't deserve. If you believe that God is speaking to you, or you are in the presence of God, or God is acting on your life in some way, and you expect other people to believe it too, you must be able to demonstrate objectively how we can recognize that your experience is an authentic one of God and not something else that appears to be an experience of God. If you can't do that, and to the best of my knowledge, no one ever has, nor has anyone ever even proposed a mechanism that would be capable of making such a discernment, then your experiences, which you believe to be of God, are yours and yours alone. And they should not compel anyone else to believe in the existence of your God or the God of anyone else who reports having similar experiences. There are simply too many natural explanations for such experiences, and absolutely no empirical evidence to corroborate the existence of any such God. Sorry, Josh. And I hope everything's okay. Ambulances, fire trucks just tearing down the road outside. Anyway, that's it for this video. That's it for chapter 14. I will be back in the next video in this series to cover the next 3 chapters of the book, and those would be chapter 15, Between Two Worlds, chapter 16, Holding On, and chapter 17, One Miracle. That's for next time. Thank you for joining me this time. As always, if you have any sort of response to what I've had to say in this video, if you agree, disagree, think I got something right, think I got something wrong, think I could have made a point better than I did, think I just really nailed one, whatever you have to say about what I've had to say, please leave a comment and let me know. And also, if you enjoy watching these videos, if you enjoy this work that I do, you get something out of it, whether it's this series in particular or some other of my YouTube series, please, please, please consider helping me to continue to do this, and perhaps even I'll learn to speak one day, by contributing to this channel through Patreon. You can support the work I do by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives. You can become a part of my Patreon campaign and help me continue to do this for as little as $1 a month. But if you can afford it, and if you think I'm worth it, and you dig a little bit deeper into your pocket, and you contribute at a level of $10 a month or more, then one of the perks that becomes available to you is you get access to the scripts for these episodes, and you actually get to read the script for the episode the day before the video goes live. So this very script that I have been reading from in this video will be posted to my $10 plus patron feed the day before this video goes live on YouTube. And if you so desire, you can check it out and read up on it and experience the video that way. That's just one of the little bonuses I've decided to give to people who go above and beyond and support my Patreon campaign. So thanks to all of you who have done that. Thanks to all of you who are considering doing that or are about to do that. And thanks to all of you, whether you're Patreon contributors or not, for watching, for liking, for sharing, for subscribing. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you. And I'm so glad that you joined me. And I will see you in the next video.